Thank you. I'm gonna start my speech in three, two, one. Panel, we came here today to propose this motion as we support the rise of China as a superpower. That means we support a world where China has a superpower, and we think it's better for the international community than a world without China as a superpower. 4 points of framing. First is the definition of a superpower. What do we mean by a superpower? It's a country or a nation who is powerful and have big global influence in terms of 3 points: army, economy, and technology. Another point is that superpower rise in specific geopolitical area when there is a power vacuum in terms of economical and military influence. Countries in our definition, in our world, we have two global superpowers. It's the United States of America, the biggest and the strongest, and we have China, which rising in Asia after the presence of a power vacuum resulted by the demolition of USSR. Second point of framing is the notion of a good or efficient superpower. What makes a superpower better than another? Now, before saying everything, so that the op team won't build a case on drama and examples, so on drama blaming China as an evil country and stating example as Hong Kong and concentration camps. Let's discuss this point once and for all. Global superpowers aren't angels. They aren't peacemakers. They aren't humanity guardians. They are nor world police nor judges. They are just countries who are driven by their interests. Oppression stands on both sides of the house. Conflict too, but they have different methods or strategies to achieve their interests. So where we mean a better country, a better superpower means less oppression, less military usage, less conflict, and less lethal oppression. An efficient superpower also will incorporate developing countries as economic partners, not just exploiting their resources. An efficient superpower also is more likely to be unbiased in conflicts between small nations and be better in peace as a peace negotiator. Those three elements favor one global superpower on another. Third point of framing is the timeline of our debate. We are supporting the rise of China as a superpower, which is an ongoing process. We are discussing a timeline, no thank you, from 2003 until now. Why we choose that? In 2003, with President J reforms, we saw an outbreaking of China's economic influence around the world. Fourth point of framing is about the status quo. Um, let's continue our debate a little bit, contextualize our debate a little bit. Let's talk before 2003. We saw a big power vacuum in Asia. USA is trying to influence military that area and is failing in that. A proof of that is Afghanistan, and we saw the results right now. We have major economical area with no investments, such Africa, such South America, and South Pacific, and Central Asia, which puts us in the opposition team world in two scenarios. It's even no super for in your side of the house. There is no. It's between two things. No superpower rises in that area, and USA be the only power and the only single global power, superpower, or another scenario, which means that another regional power will rise as a global superpower. It's either Iran, Russia, or Pakistan, or India. We will prove to you in this debate that our model, our world, which are living right now, is better than your two scenario in terms of benefits for world trade, developing countries, and world peace and stability. If we prove that to you, we win this debate. And once again, a reminder, we are not supporting China to be the only superpower. We are supporting a world when both power, USA and China, exist. What's our principle? We are looking at this topic from we are looking at international relations from a realist perspective. Superpower are selfish in nature. They are not angel, but we see that the existence of China as a global big player, by a pragmatic point of view, it has the best impact on global politics and global economies than the two scenarios of the opposition team of the House of Team Opposition. We will discuss that on two major arguments. The first is from an economical perspective with me, and the second point is from a geopolitical perspective with our second speaker. Moving to my argument, the rise of China as a superpower is beneficial for the world economy and development. I'm going to discuss that on three different levels. First of all, trade, investments, and development. Trade and investment. Before that, I want to refer to a point about the development strategies as a global superpower of China. Its whole ideology is based on economical development and investment, as we saw after the reforms of President J. It's her major global leverage and power and cooperate and to cooperate with other countries as economical power. Even the military power is centralized in China's sea. We don't see a worldwide development as we see in the United States of America. Hold on for that point for a moment as we use it in our analyze. Let's begin with the first point, which is trade. Before 2003, the big major player in the world economy was the United States of America, influencing the economy and even monopolizing the trade market. The world economy and stocks was linked and vital and sensible to the American economy, which is characterized which is somehow bad. A world economy based on the state of a single country means it's volatile and unstable, which is risky. The smallest problem in USA can cause a global crisis. But when you have not the global big economical players as China, what is rising and influence the global economy, we see a more decentralized world trade, a more decentralized market, which means more stability and more balance to the world economy, which is more like in the world economy. It also provides other countries or other partners to trade with. It's go on. I can take your drawing now.
This proposition.
I didn't hear you well. Sorry. Trade. It's more choice, more decentralized free market. China has added more stability to world economy and more choice and decentralization to the free world trade. Moving to the next part, which is investment. We have poor developing countries which needs the most investment in them in some by billion of dollars in an important sector to actually have a kickstart to development. Countries as such African countries and South America and Central Asia needs big investment in important sectors such infrastructure. The point is that that type of investment needs a lot and is most costly, and all gains are on the very long term. The only type of big investment, as we saw, was by colonial countries exploiting the resources. We saw China to expand his relations. We saw her investing a big amount of money in those countries, in those sectors, which are not high rewarding, but they are the most needed by those countries. So as a conclusion and as a consequence, China has added a lot more to the international community. A world without China is less stabilized economy, more centralized world trade, and we saw countries with no investments and success like Ethiopia and Rwanda in African countries. We will not have a place in your side of the house. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. Speaker spoke for 8 minutes and 35 seconds. So please, let's welcome the first speaker from the opposition side, Bonita.
Hi everyone, I prefer my people eyes verbally. I will start in 3, 2, 1. Panel. For a country to have the qualifications of a superpower, there are certain criteria that must be upheld, right? It must be a state that cannot be ignored on the world stage and without whose cooperation, no world problem can be solved. This motion asks of us as the negators if we want to support the rise of China as a superpower. And with all honesty, we feel that China rising as a superpower will be detrimental to the world and to its citizens. In our knowing of what a superpower is, I repeat that it has to be a state that without its cooperation, no world problem can be solved. But instead of helping without asking for anything, China would have the incentive to help only when it benefits. The truth of the matter is that global superpowers like China would trap countries that are badly off. They say that it is better to deal with the devil that you know than the angel you do not know at all. And we feel it applies in this scenario. China might look like an angel to some of these countries and probably to the farmers of today's debate, but we have to ask ourselves a fundamental question. What is the angel's desire? Before I move on to my next debate, let us move on to what the pre-current speaker was talking about, right? He brought up arguments of how China would be a good thing for the world, right? That it would benefit the world economically. He brought about these two things of how they did trade and investments, and two, how they decentralized growth rates, meaning more stability. But what is stability really? We find that stability is actually something that would lack once China becomes a global superpower, something that you're going to find later in my case as well. He brings about how the world is going to be benefited economically, and that is not something that we see is very essential in today's debate. It is not good enough compared to the rest of the harms that are gotten from China rising as a global superpower. He tells us about China bringing a lot of money in these different countries, but he fails to tell us how she tends to do it for a whole different purpose other than helping, right? Panel, today's debate. Superpower status is a source of national pride and brings significant economic and political benefits. We agree, but whether you use the original definition of superpower status, the possession of these preeminent military power and the ability to project it globally, what matters is the long-term capacity to pay for it all. This is something that the pre-current speaker failed to give to us. Will China be able to handle this long-term capacity or title of being called a global superpower? That is the question we have to ask ourselves. Proposition in today's debate has to tell us or even show us if China can handle this long-term capacity. For make no mistake, the costs China bears today are small compared with those that it will need to shoulder for decades as a superpower. But leaving that aside, let us assume that we accepted China to become a superpower. What would happen to our citizens? We feel that these Chinese citizens would be harmed in the rise of China as a global superpower. And I'm going to show this in 4 ways. Number 1, the debt problem that my second speaker is going to handle. Number 2, demographics. Number 3, the looming water crisis. And number 4, education problems. Starting with demographics, the first argument. While China's population will continue to grow for perhaps a decade or so, its labor force is already shrinking drastically. We also see the cost of social security, caring for the elderly will be very enormous. Labor productivity must rise very quickly, but how will it do so if China isn't even catering for this very problem? And yet proposition is the same group of people that wanted to rise as a global superpower. It is no secret that China is a country that adores the male gender above anything. And it is very sad to see that even in this generation, having a daughter is not good enough in terms of, the Chinese culture. But we cannot ignore the instability in terms of gender balance for Chinese people, right? Even with the one-child policy, meaning that in the coming decades that are going to arrive, 30 million and 40 million in the active bracket of 20 to 40 years will not find a partner. And what does this mean for Chinese citizens? That means these different people would have, let's say, pent-up frustrations and lead to different many things like high rates in crime. But if China is unstable in her own country, how can she possibly help others when she has to help herself first? The next thing we have to understand is the water crisis, right? 12 northern provinces with roughly half of China's industry, power generation, agriculture, and population suffer from acute water scarcity, right? 28,000 rivers that have disappeared over this 20-year plan underlines how unsustainable the current model is, and furthermore shows how these Chinese citizens would suffer. immensely. Being a global superpower requires a lot, but is China fit to do so when its own country is in peril? Let's move on to the education problems that cannot be rectified in time, right? Only 30% of our citizens have finished secondary education. Efforts to right this might take a long period of time. And what does this mean, right? No amount of later vocational training will provide a high-tech innovative workforce if it has to rely on those who have not learned how to learn. Without a solid economic base, the chances are that China will not surpass the US as the world superpower. It may not even be the largest economy for long. Anyway, do we trust China to rise even further as a global superpower? Absolutely not. Do we think that China rising is accepted?
Ma'am, do you prefer a world where the USA is the only superpower, or do you prefer a world where there are no superpower?
Thank you for your POI. So personally, we just want a world where China is not a rising global superpower. But moving on, we ought to look at all our cards in this debate and furthermore understand what China hungers for, right? Personally, we do not support China to be a superpower. If one day China would, let's say, change her color and turn into a superpower, if she too should play the tyrant that the world and everywhere subjects her to bullying, aggression, and exploitation, the people of the world should identify her as a social imperialism, expose it, oppose it, and work together with the Chinese people to overthrow it. But we have to understand what China hungers for. In 3 ways, I will show you this. 1, China will insist on its own world order. Number 2, China will export its values. Number 3, China only tolerates relationships it can dominate. Firstly, looking back at the history of China, we've seen it wants other governments to pay tributes to it. And this is something that we're seeing even today, that China might want to restore the aspects of the old imperial order. Secondly, China will export its values. Unlike the US with its zeal to bring its form of liberty to all, China does not seem interested in changing the world. This argument goes just to say making money from it. And thirdly, China only tolerates relationships it can dominate. What does this mean for the countries on the receiving end that are, let's say, more powerful? Does this mean that just because they're more powerful than China, that they will have to conform to the standards that China has set? That is the question we have to ask ourselves in today's debate. Moving on. It does not seem plausible or sensible for China to be supported as a global superpower if the individuals of this world might not even be helped at all. And I've never been more proud to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. Judge, please be aware that she spoke for 7 minutes and 55 seconds. Okay, so without further ado, let's please welcome the second speaker from the proposition side, Adia.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to set up my timer. Okay, I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. The opposition has failed to engage and give you, panel, an analysis of how a world without China as a global superpower would be any better. They have not sufficiently engaged in the framing provided by my first speaker, nor have they explained to you why they provide any exclusive benefits on their side. I will do 3 things in my speech today. Number 1, I will respond to the opposition's arguments. Secondly, I will outline my first argument about accountability for global superpowers. And finally, I will strengthen my first speaker's arguments about the nature of economic leverage in relation to geopolitics. Before I begin, let's be clear. We support a world where China is a superpower. This does not mean that we stand behind all of China's policies, nor do we support a world where China is the only superpower. The opposition in this debate, however, must advocate for a world where China is not a superpower and where, consequently, the United States remains the only or the most powerful global superpower in the world. They must stand behind world with political imbalance and a lack of an accountability mechanism. Why is it better on our side? China's efficient economic investments still exist on our side, but we remove the harms created by the absence of China as a global superpower in the opposition's world. But first, let me do some rebuttal. So the opposition speaker has told you about how in order for a country to be a global superpower, they must be a state that cannot be ignored in the world politic and must be a state where cooperation is necessary to solve political turmoil. China, they've explained to you why China would only have the incentive to help the countries that it benefits from. But how is this mutually exclusive on their side, on our side? If China were not a global superpower, this would leave the United States as the most powerful global superpower. And going off on the definition that the opposition speaker has provided you, this would mean that global conflicts would need only the United States collaboration to resolve conflicts. This would mean that countless countries that do not align with the US's ideologies would be fairly unrepresented or undermined. Having China as a global superpower balances the scale and creates a higher level of political stability on our side. They've also told you how if China were to become a global superpower, the citizens of China would be harmed. They've explained to you how China has a debt problem, how its level of force is decreasing dramatically. I have three responses for this. Number one, internal domestic problems are not mutually exclusive in this debate. The United States, a current global superpower, deals with many domestic problems such as debt, unemployment, political turmoil. Still, it continues to work as a global superpower, investing in other countries. Number two, the opposition continues to ignore the fact that removing China as a global superpower would create more disastrous effects. China invests in many developing countries like in Asia and Africa. These Asian and African countries depend on China's investment and economic collaboration. Removing China as a global superpower would mean that these countries would now struggle with debt problems, famine, unemployment. Opposition's world is a world where hundreds of countries, billions of people are disadvantaged. And finally, who else can be a global superpower if China can't? What other country has the economic, technological, and military capacities to take on the investment that China has? By opposition standards, there can be no country who can be a global superpower, which is incredibly problematic. They've also told you that China will exploit its values. Exploitation is not mutually exclusive. It exists on both sides. We know that the United States has been exploitative before and China has, but the difference is that in our world, we still have China's efficient economic investments. And this actually leads me to my first argument about accountability and power imbalances. The context for this argument is as follows. In a world without China as a global superpower, the United States immediately takes the reins as the most powerful global superpower. We think this is incredibly problematic because it removes an important accountability mechanism created by China's presence as a global superpower, one that creates detrimental effects for geopolitics. We think that China's presence as a global superpower, removing China's presence as a global superpower would create detrimental effects for geopolitics in Asia, stability in the international community, and representation of developing countries as a whole. I will break this down into 3 points. Number one, geopolitical areas in China. Number two, international community. And number three, developing countries. First, the geopolitical area of China. In the current status quo, China is the most powerful global superpower in Asia. As a global superpower, China invests and collaborates with several Asian countries. But if we remove China as a global superpower, there's going to be an immediate power vacuum in Asia. Several minor powers like Iran, India, Japan, Korea are bound to compete for that position. So why are the alternative powers worse off and why is China better? A likely alternative would be Russia. Russia, however, has invested in few, if not any Asian countries, preferring to focus on nations like Ukraine, Uzbekistan, etc. Russia would make a poor alternative for a global superpower because its interests, political mainly, do not align with the majority of Asian countries. Russia also does not share cultural or social ties with many Asian countries, which makes its collaboration with geopolitical area of Asia far less successful. The same applies to countries like India, who also cannot provide the same economic leverage as China does. So now let's analyze the second likely scenario, which is the US. Why is China still a better alternative than the US in Asia. For decades, the United States has not invested in Asian countries, dismissing minor powers like Korea, Philippines, Japan. China, on the other hand, has traded and collaborated economically with the majority of Asian countries, and as explained, their economic investments have been far more beneficial for these Asian countries, mostly because of two, their cultural and social understanding that the United States does not have, which is why the United States investments in the Middle East have been so unsuccessful, because the cultural divide hinders America from making investments that align with the Middle East interests, which is likely to happen as well with Asia. So why is China necessary in the international community as a global superpower? The absence of China as a global superpower leaves the United States as the most powerful superpower. But this, however, removes an important accountability mechanism. Take the example of proxy wars and conflict. With China as a superpower, the United States is not at free liberty of creating political turmoil. Why? China has the political incentive to stop the United States from creating conflict in developing nations, especially in countries where China is investing. China would not want their trading partner to be dealing with war, because this directly interferes with the quality of the deal and the economics of it all. Thus, the presence of China as a global superpower is essential at maintaining an accountability mechanism for other global superpowers like the United States. And so China can act as a peaceful negotiator or a representative of developed nations that are not supported by the United States or the majority of African countries, Asian countries, etc. The impact of this is clear. On our side, political turmoils within the international community are likely to be avoided or negotiated with a clear accountability mechanism existing. And for all these reasons, I proudly stand for proposition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. Judge, she spoke for 7 minutes and 20 seconds. Okay, so without further ado, let's please welcome the second speaker from the opposition side, Huzifa.
Yeah, hello. Am I audible? That's A, B. Can I get a timer on the screen?
Yes. Yes, 1 second.
All right, sure. Thank you.
All right, I'll start the timer whenever you're ready.
Okay, yeah, I'm ready. I'll go in 3, 2, 1. From the very first words that were uttered by first proposition, we've understood that side proposition have been incapable of taking this debate in our best case scenario, in our worst case scenario. To begin with, they came over here and they showed us that countries that are globally influential depend on 3 things: their army, their economy, and their technology. But we had to start asking questions and drawing lines from the very first words uttered. They say that China has the greatest army in Asia, the greatest economy, and the best technology. But there's but that definition is exceptionally vague, and they've got no facts or any proof to prove this concept or this idea. Let's start off by looking at countries in Asia. You've got Japan, which has ties with America and has arguably one of the biggest armies in the world, which is one of the most economically developed countries in the world and one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world. Why is China being used in this debate? Because it's very convenient for side proposition's case. A country that is so anti-American is perfect for them to run as an example for a country that stands as a global superpower. But even before that, we have to look at a number of things that they've done in this debate. They've ran away from the concept of politics in this debate completely. According to them, China will not even make a slight attempt to share its beliefs with the countries that it has trade ties with, something that is exceptionally problematic in this debate. They don't once look at the concept of manipulation, of racism, of genocide, of humanitarian issues in China, because according to them, this is something that is not mutually exclusive to them and is something that is on both sides of the house. But we have to question this because we've seen on a number of occasions how China has affected the workforces in a number of countries, how countries like Africa is becoming China's China as they force people within Africa to take up exceptionally cheap labor with almost no advantages to these African nations. But they still have the gall to come in this debate and tell us that China is the only country in the world that is helping Asia and Africa, something that we've heard both in the first and second speech. But we have to question the help that we've heard of on this side of the house. Who is being helped on their side of the house? Countries like Pakistan, like Sri Lanka, like Lesotho, like Kenya, who have been given massive infrastructural projects, being forced to pay off debts that China knows they'll never be able to pay off. And what do countries like China do in these situations? It's very simple. What China does is they occupy these ports, these trains, these tram lines, and then they start using it to share their own goods. Not once have they engaged the concept of the One Belt, One Road or China's manipulation of the workforce. But no, it's fine. It's great because it's convenient to them, because China is highly acceptable. From the very beginning, side proposition have taken this debate like a pancake and folded it in such a way that it's only comfortable for China to be seen as a global superpower. But let's look at this concept of superpowerdom in a more precise manner. China can't even be considered a superpower because it isn't a long-term superpower, something that I'm going to go on to in a later part of my speech. China is incapable of staying sufficient or efficient in their instance, something that they've tossed 1,000 times. China simply isn't efficient as a superpower for two reasons. First of all, something that I'm going to tell you about later in this speech, because they're in massive depth so big that China is actually starting to show its cracks. But they also come over here in this debate and they show us a bunch of blanket statements saying China offers stability. But we'll show you in this debate how China offers so-called stability. China's support system consists of predatory loaning methods, which are built to be incapable of repayment. Something that we've had to question on a number of instances in this debate. This only saves them. Not only this, but they also go out and give us other blanket statements saying both sides have manipulation. Something that is just exceptionally funny and a massive concession in this debate. China can continue to help, but it's something that we've also had to question. But it doesn't only end there, because we have to understand whether or not China has the superpower status at the moment. The simple answer is no. As it stands, the only thing that side proposition is offering to us is status quo, but we give one of the biggest oppressors in the world more power. But still, let's look at them and their face value. According to them, China doesn't have superpower status as it is, and this is a fact. But according to them, China is incapable of helping as it stands. They're shackled by America, and they're incapable of helping on a greater level. But we also have to question this on its surface level. They also give us different instances saying that China is a country that understands culture and how it trades with countries like the Middle East. But for our information, the Middle East countries have isolated China due to their Islamophobic genocides. So many questions in this debate, yet there's little to no engagement. Not to mention the fact that the second speaker has only come over here, and really the only thing that she's done is made concessions, saying the issues that we have on our side of the house are mutually exclusive. But not once have we heard any concept of how China takes accountability for its obvious issues. What is so concerning on our side of the house? I'll move into my arguments. How China is the greatest oppressor in the world. Let's look at the facts. China has an ongoing genocide against Muslims. It's overtly male, it's communist, it lacks freedom of speech, and it's overtly racist as well. These are things that are completely true, they're factual, right? But we have to look at this and we have to understand how this would affect other countries. We have to understand there's a concept known as a sphere of influence. These ideas can spill over to other countries that China is helping. If anything, China could even force these countries into believing their methods, their mantras, their communist beliefs. This is something that hasn't been engaged once, and side proposition's only engagement is, oh, I promise it won't happen, because it's something that we haven't seen before. We had to look at the resemblance between countries like China and America in the Cold War. I mean, China and Russia in the Cold War. How China are essentially setting up proxy states around them, forcing them to believe in similar laws as them. But we also have to look at a number of other things, like how China's systems are completely predatory and aren't built to help the countries that they're giving aid to. No, I will not take you. We've seen on a number of occasions how China is capable of building massive infrastructural projects like ports in Sri Lanka, whilst knowing Sri Lanka is incapable of paying and thus occupying these ports for the next 100 years. It's something that China has done on a multitude of occasions, but there's little to no engagement on this. And I'm going to move on to my next argument, telling you about how China is one of the countries that is the most engrossed in debt. China's debt is almost 250% greater than its GDP, making it the world leader in the debt on the debt front. Furthermore, China's household debt, this is people to people, is almost up than 210% than the GDP. Officially, non-performing loans China's commercial banks total at around 1.5 trillion yuan, but some analysts say that these stats are actually incorrect and it could be 14 times higher because lenders use various methods to conceal the true figure. These statistics truly show that China are quite literally incapable of splurging the cash on such consistent basis when it comes to their loan system. China is massive now, and yes, this is a concession that we've got to make, but the truth is, for how long? China simply isn't a sufficient and efficient leader in today's world. And we have to question the credibility of side proposition when they come over here and suppose that China should be a world leader. On a plethora of situations, we've shown you that China simply is incapable of being a world leader. We've shown you from the very beliefs that side proposition have shown us of army, economy, and technology, how China simply aren't advanced enough to be up there with the big dogs. And that's without considering the humanitarian crises and self-interest that China continues to force upon the world. What have we understood in this debate? Side proposition are still incapable of taking us on our best case scenario and simply debate a debate of lies in which we will cast a dark eye, ignore China's flaws. On our side of the house, we've shown you on a number of occasions how we've engaged on these concepts, how we've shown how China is unstable, how we've shown on a number of occasions why China simply isn't a good leader. Please vote for side opposition if you vote for a side that.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. Judge, please be aware that the speaker spoke for 8 minutes and 27 seconds. Okay, so without further ado, let's please welcome the third speaker from the proposition side, Christian.
Okay, cool. Am I audible? Sorry, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, can I just see the timer on the screen, please?
Oh, yes, of course. Okay, I'll start the timer whenever you're ready.
Okay, cool. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, let's for a second agree with absolutely everything that team opposition say. Let's agree that China is evil, that China has a debt crisis, that China doesn't have enough water, doesn't have enough labor, that China is an evil military power exerting its influence across the world. Assuming that we agree with absolutely everything that's come from their side of the bench, does any of that prove to us why we should not support, in principle, the rise of a secondary power, superpower? Have they ever actually given us any sort of comparison to tell us why the world is a better place with only the USA as a superpower, why the world is a better place without any superpowers? Given the fact that none of those comparisons have even happened, it's very difficult to credit any of the arguments. Now, in my speech, of course, I'm going to rebut them and going to give our own comparative. But just understand in this debate that we have actually been comparative. My second speaker especially tells you this debate is about explaining to you why there's an accountability mechanism, why even though China is imperfect, it means that they have economic incentives to ensure there's accountability, to ensure there's less turmoil, to have a check on American influence and American power. The fact that that has not been fully engaged by side opposition, the fundamental clash in this debate, means that even if we accept everything they've said thus far, and I don't give my speech, it's impossible for them to win today's debate. So let's just deal with a lot of the stuff they said, and then I'll give you the comparative on why we think we win. So firstly, let's deal with a few of the issues they said. The first general point they have is to simply tell us that, well, China can't really be a superpower. They can't sustain it, either by virtue of their demographics, their labor shortage, or the fact that they have so much debt. We have a few responses to this. A, we think that this is simply not true, right? We think that China is a growing economy. We think that in terms of demographic change is something that everyone in the world does struggle with. In terms of water, they do have irrigation measures, but more than that, things like debt, which the last speaker liked to go on. Well, yes, the USA also has a lot of debt. Every country has a lot of debt. Japan has immeasurable amounts of debt. In the USA, there isn't a vast majority of families say they can't put $400 together in the instance of an emergency. Every single country, as my second speaker told you, has internal issues. This debate is not about that. But even if that were true, telling me that a country is not going to be powerful in the future is not an argument to tell me why they shouldn't be powerful now. I cannot make an argument about why the US is a bad superpower by making an argument about why the US is not powerful. right? That is not an argument, and that doesn't really make much sense. So even if it is true, we think it's irrelevant to say that. And moreover, we think the debate presupposes that China is a rising superpower because it says this house supports the rise of superpower, right? The rise of China's superpower. Like the debate was, this house regrets the rise of what. We would assume that that thing already happened, or that thing is in fact true. Secondly, when they talk about exploitation, how China's going to be doing that. Firstly, we've already told you how that is not mutually exclusive, and they haven't made an argument to make it mutually exclusive, so it's very difficult to award them. But to engage them directly, we'd say, firstly, China does not have an incentive to be as exploitative as they would like to make them seem. They, for example, give us the examples of the BRI. Now, we wish the BRI was better, but the reason why a lot of countries chose the BRI over things like the IMF and the World Bank is because those countries simply weren't offering loans to them, or if they were offering loans, those loans were even more exploitative. So given that countries do have to develop, they do have to create infrastructure, we prefer that there is at least someone available for them, even if they are exploitative. Secondly, we think that China has an incentive not to be exploitative long-term because it wants people that are economically sustainable and economically self-sufficient. So compared to, like, for example, Western powers that just want to use Africa as a place where they can use it for manufacturing and developing and maintaining themselves as being rich, China wants to continuously develop and wants to make more of its own citizens rich. So it has an incentive to develop other African countries to make them rich as well, to, for example, send people over there to work, to, for example, ensure that those are people that they can trade, that they can sell their manufactured goods towards. Whereas European and Western powers only have an incentive to ensure that those places are factories where they can make their finished goods and which they can continuously benefit off the benefits of colonialism. We would secondly say that even if all this horrible economic exploitation is happening, it is at least better than what the US would be doing. Because if the US were the only one available, the US would either be exploiting these countries, or they would use their military might to invade these countries, or to put some sort of military pressure on them for them to agree with them. We would support, or we think we should recognize the fact that China has been very limited in the use of military power, perhaps only around its own borders, but nothing near to what the USA would do in places like South America, in the Middle East, and Asia, whereas China has mostly been quite cooperative with the majority of the countries, has been very respectful of their borders, and there aren't really any prevalent examples of China going to war with some countries because they didn't want to sell them oil. So we think that on the comparative, you really can't say that China shouldn't exist and that China is such a horrible power, given that the Western powers simply aren't caring and do not care about African nations in the first place. Now, let's also look at a few bits of comparative. On the economic aspect, right, we would say that it's simply not fair to say that besides all the harms that China might do, that choice shouldn't exist. Even if we concede within the choice that China is imperfect, they should tell us why China shouldn't exist, why those options shouldn't be available for those countries, why those countries shouldn't be able to make a decision about whether or not they want to take on loans or not. And second of all, they have to not just give us a few examples, but tell us why it is in the nature or inherently in China's interest to harm countries long-term through exploitative deals instead of dealing with them, developing them, and trading with them in order to benefit over periods of time. We think that there are multiple instances that you could find where the West or African or the West, like the IMF and the World Bank, have been structurally important in ensuring that African countries remain poor. How there's more poverty in Africa in 2020 than there were in the 1970s is precisely because of all the involvement of the IMF and the World Bank. China has been improving that, building infrastructure, providing education to Africans. Perhaps they seize a few ports here and there, and they aren't perfect all the time, but they're definitely better than the status quo. That's why we support the rise of them as a power. Not because they're perfect, but because the incentives are things which are create a net benefit to the world as a whole. Second of all, something which we think they fail to fully engage is things like Asian cooperation. The only response they gave to us was to say that, oh, China isn't going to be dealing with the Middle East because they're Islamophobic. We agree that China probably isn't going to be dealing with the Middle East. That's okay. We think that, first of all, they might still, because obviously those countries have a lot to gain from China. But second of all, a lot of those countries are powerful in and of themselves. They're not really being influenced by world power. So whether or not a world superpower existed or not, especially for the Gulf states, wouldn't make that much of a difference. But if there is a major conflict, we prefer that China and the West be involved to mediate versus only the West and only Western interests being involved. Similar to, for example, what happened in Iraq when there was very little checks and balances in place. Whereas now, if that sort of invasion were to occur, there would be China available for those checks and balances. But in terms of Asian support, what China does is it deals with people that are socially and culturally similar to itself and has a direct incentive to ensure those people are sustainable and grow long term. Something which it hasn't even been doing as a superpower, but long before it became a superpower, helping them with, for example, manufacturing or import substitution or industrialization via exports, etc. So we think that China has a very direct incentive to help the people around them, similar to how, for example, Europe wants to develop Europe because that ensures that they have stable trading partners, but they don't care as much about Africa because it doesn't directly impact or affect them. Lastly, let's also talk very importantly about the accountability mechanism. We told you here and very clearly that China has this incentive to ensure that there isn't wars in places that they're trading with, that infrastructure that they've built isn't destroyed by American military jets, that the influence they expand economically isn't undermined by American wars for conquest. We think that's a very direct, very massive benefit we get on our side of the house that hasn't been substantively addressed on-site opposition. But moreover, when we talk about political influence, even when they tell us about all the humanitarian issues that China has, firstly, we say that China does have humanitarian issues, but we do not see those humanitarian issues spreading to the countries which they go towards, because they know that if they, for example, try to culturally change Africa, they have less trade links. Their incentive is to be as economically influential as possible. We would say that there is no actual precedent of China being massively politically influential. Their long-term goal is to be economically influential. Even if they are slightly politically influential, they have to give us on the comparative why the US would be less politically influential, which is not true. For all those reasons, we're very...
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. Speaker spoke for 8 minutes and about 17 seconds. Okay, so without further ado, let's please have the third speaker from the opposition side, Becky.
Okay, thank you, Chair. If you have a, can I be heard first? Do you want to start talking without the confirmation?
Yes, your audio
Can
is fine.
someone? Thank you. If you guys, if you have a POI, please feel free to drop it in the text space. But if after the 4th minute I haven't taken you, just unmute and say POI once, and then I'll take you if I still have the time to. Just allow me a second or two to run through my notes, and then I'll start so long. Thank you. Okay, I'll start in 3, 2, 1. Final, there are a few things that we really have to note in today's debate. One of them is the nature of a superpower. My first speaker does a marvelous job in trying to tailor to you what a global superpower looks like, right? And I'll just pick what she said. Essentially, she said that these are countries whose global influence cannot be ignored politically or economically, right? The first concession we all need to make in this debate is that no actor between the two is a benevolent actor. The second concession is to make is that these countries, developing or not, both benefits from the relations that they have with either China or the United States of America. The second concession we need to make. The third concession we need to inherently look like is that for a global superpower to exist in most instances, it tries to spread out its global influence. Panel note, for the almost 200 years that we've had the United States of America as the global superpower to some extent, right? When we talk of it in this instance, we mean the others are at least some distance behind and they are just superpowers, but not to the extent of the United States. This means that over the period of 2 years, we've seen the USA trying to infringe upon the nations it tries to relate with ideas on liberalism, right? Some of the ideas on democracy and these kinds of things. So you see, this kind of position puts them in a place where they can influence and infringe upon things like sovereignty and autonomy of these smaller nations that are in discussion today. But even then, right, we need to also concede to the fact that this is something that government doesn't do in today's debate. And even if they do, they become disingenuous to it. The other thing is that for every debt given, for every help given, there are strings attached, either from the USA or from China. My speech is going to look like this, basically, after those few clarifications. I'm going to weigh out the debate based on what was brought, right? And then secondly, I'm going to show you why every argument that we made with extensive analysis that are just not even new matter in this debate, show you why everything they argue for is not mutually exclusive on our side, but everything that they argue for in itself is more detrimental than they try to paint it out to be good. So let's begin. But before that, a few rebuttals to get from the third speaker. The third speaker says, and I quote, right, China has checks and balances that exist. Panel, note that that the global ideology, the Eurocentric or not ideology that the world has of China is an ideology that seeks to present China as one that has disregard for human rights and all those kinds of things, something that they run away from. This is something that we have seen on our own, even if they come back and say in their reply speak that that is just Western propaganda to try and counter this growing influence. We reject that premise. We tell you that in instances where we've seen in Kenya during the construction of the SGR railway line, where Blacks are subjugated in their own country, we feel that that is immoral of these actors to come to the country of these Black people and then again treat them like animals, where they couldn't even share tables and they couldn't treat them well, where they could even beat them physically. We feel that that in itself means that China is already out of control. So any ideology of existence of checks and balances, we feel that that isn't true and we don't accept it. The other thing we need to understand, they tell us that this is contradictory, right? They tell us that China trades with people of the same ideologies. Note, they previously told us that China trades with countries that it wants to help because for them, for some reason, China, according to them, is not capitalistic like the world we are all in because of the communistic ideologies that it seeks to perpetuate. Even then, right, on this side of the house, we show you a world in which if that is the line of argumentation they are going to settle for, we show you that these ideologies could be enforced on these countries that we are having. Look at the Belt and Road Initiative, right? That is a move, a global move by China to sort of have some sort of sustainability of power and whatnot. I'm going to interrogate that one later. Even then, what do they argue for on their side of the house? They tell you that there's existing a power vacuum. One thing you need to notice that some certain things could fail to exist in this world, right? We could wake up tomorrow and we have no cheese or ham. But one thing that can never exist is a power vacuum, because the aspect of rising means that China was already competing against another actor. They concede to that. They tell you that China has been competing against the USA for heaven knows over 30 years now. And by virtue that it has surpassed the USA, it means that the power vacuum they are advocating for didn't exist. Because panel, if we necessarily have a power vacuum, it means one, there's no competition in existence. Two, we will not be discussing the rising of one against the other, because initially, what were they rising towards? They're just competing against each other. So that premise is completely out of this debate. They tell us that China is supporting a number of global project. That is the crux of that case. That case basically hinges on the whole idea that China is running projects that are very beneficial to most developing countries. Let me bring it home to Africa. In instances where China goes to Nigeria and builds a dam, right, and tells the Nigerian government, we'll help you build this dam, but in instances we're going to run it ourselves. Look at the environmental degradation as a result of that. I'm going to show you how a number of projects China has run, just examples in retrospect, how they are counterproductive or how they are counterintuitive in its sense, right? Let's go back to countries like Kenya of itself. The SGR, built by Chinese, now controlled by Chinese. Panel note that even the inscriptions on the train, the instructions in terms of things like fire outbreaks are written in Chinese. If this isn't global dominance and any form of subjugation of the people don't understand the Chinese language or don't buy into those ideologies, then I do not know what it is. Let us take it back further, right? We look at instances where in Sri Lanka, right, because the Sri Lankan government couldn't pay back, right? Note that one, because of the debt trap that my second speaker tells you about, because they couldn't pay back. China tells you, we're going to take over your harbor for 99 years. Panel note that these individuals do not have any counter alternative to actually seek. They actually give out their harbor. We all know the importance of such things, such resources, harbors, because that is where goods enter and leave the country, imports and exports. So that influence that it has is very detrimental to these developing economies. The other thing that you need to most importantly understand from my speech is the whole idea that in as much as we agree that certain things have been made that are beneficial, we say that those ones don't even benefit the target audience who should be members of these developing countries. They tell you that impact on the international community and whatnot. But no, just on an ideology, China is like that one new kid in class that no one wants to be friends with. But China's influence is growing, so it's trying to look for allies. So in as much as it's trying to find allyship, we feel that the thing that it does is sort of just trying to control the politics of these countries and the economies of these countries. And I've shown you the spread, and I'll show you the spread of its values and how that compromises a lot of things. The other thing, they ignore the whole idea of exploitation of human rights. I've cited examples there. But even before I tell you what we had, like really quickly, panel note, the Chinese government or the infrastructural department approached the African Union and told them, let us build your headquarters. They bugged the headquarters. That means they stole data from the headquarters without the knowledge of the people there. That is invasion of privacy. And we tell you that in instances where as a growing superpower, it is able to abuse its power in this capacity by trying to befriend people, we reject that premise. We feel that there is a right to sort of hold our ground as the African Union or even African countries again to counter this kind of growing influence. That panel, if they can go to an extent of choosing to build it and telling you can pay back at whatever time, then use you to steal your own data and use it against you. We feel that that is highly unfair on these developing countries. What have we brought to you in today's debate? I can't take pure eyes, I'm sorry. We've given you the nature of our developing countries. We've given you the whole idea that vacuums do not exist on numerous accounts. We tell you that the harms on how unstable China is as a country, and that instance that projecting that dominance into the world wouldn't help. The last thing you get as an analysis really from what we got is that China is going to project its influence. What influence is this? We have an authoritarian regime. We have communistic ideologies that countries that don't conform to this kind of ideology are seen as outcast, and in most instances, China wouldn't trade with them. But in instances where the USA has been there for so long, the USA is a comparative one that has regard for democracy and human rights. We are more than happy to opt into having an ally that actually regards us as human beings and not pet dogs that should be petted and abused.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. Speaker spoke for 8 minutes and 18 seconds. We will now have the opposition reply speech given to us by Bonita.
Okay, let me set my timer right here. I will start in 3, 2, 1. China, being a country with 1.3 billion people, wants to take a part in being a global superpower. And do we find it good for the rest of the world? Clearly, no. We find that there are more harms than the good in our world. And we've given you so many arguments on why we think so. Proposition paints a picture where China is purely amazing and there are only good things from China being able to invest in different countries that may not be able to flourish if China does not invest in them. But does it sound smart to let a country that would insist on its own world order when it becomes a global superpower? Things like a power vacuum that was brought about by side proposition is what they think will happen in our world, right? But proposition second speaker did not even engage in something that we brought about of long-term capacity. Would China be able to carry out the title of global superpower for more than 10 years or 30 years to come? They do not respond here. That is the question that still stands in this debate, and it receives no answer, therefore. It is preposterous for us to only push for China because of the fact that she invests in money and helps countries. But we show you how in helping, China tries to only benefit from these other countries. Our second speaker even gives an example of Sri Lanka, whose port was taken for 99 years by China because she failed to pay back the loans that China gave to her. We're not only arguing because we're inside of opposition. No, but we're simply stating facts. And the fact of the matter is that no one wants a world where global superpowers that would end up bullying or be aggressive to the other countries in the world. While proposition might want to downplay our arguments in this debate, and that's downplay, they have lost this debate because of that. We repeat that if we're looking at China in proposition's perspective, where China being an economic benefit to the world is good enough reason for them to be a global superpower. We need to look through the looking glass and wipe away the fog that proposition has tried to make. And like Alice through the looking glass, we give you the truth and the image as is. For proposition to imagine a world where only China benefits African countries is something I would call Spartan. Because really, looking at it, so many intellectuals have even seen China trapping these different countries. But for some reason, proposition decides to outrageously downplay this. They ignore the idea of exploitation of human rights. A country that is being sexist and communist is not enough for proposition to hear. Let's take a prop in their fantasy where other countries economically benefit from them, right? Let us imagine it like this. China invests in a whole different country, let's say Uganda, right? And in investing in Uganda, let's say Uganda does not have the capacity to either pay back or do something that was supposed to be in their contract of agreement. That means that in this whole thing of China being the good guy or being the angel, that means that Uganda would actually have to pay the price, whether it's giving a leg or a physical feature directly to China. That means that in this whole ideology of helping Uganda or this different country, they would actually utilize it. And I feel like this is something that has been ignored in today's debate. But this is something we actually want to show you. Why do we win the debate today? We have actually proved and exceeded far beyond what we're supposed to tell you as opposition. We feel that the mere fact that China is supposed to supposedly benefit different countries economically is not good enough for them to become a global superpower, not only reminding ourselves of how these people might not have the capacity to go for it long term. It's on those grounds that we are very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your speech. Please note that the speaker spoke for 4 minutes and 10 seconds. So now, without further ado, we'll have the final speech of today's debate, which will be the reply speech from the proposition side.
Thank you. 1 minute, I'm just going to set up my timer. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Panel. This debate is about supporting the rise of a second global power. We know, and we've already told you, panel, that global superpowers are not perfect. We've told you that we support the rise of China as a global superpower because of accountability mechanisms, because of power balances, because China has the capacity, economic, military, technological, and political, to create the stability and to balance off the United States. The opposition has failed to explain to you why a world where America is the only superpower is a better world and why our comparative is worse. They've done their best to avoid the truth, but the truth is unavoidable. Leaving the United States as the only superpower is incredibly problematic, and for that reason, they lose this debate. In my speech, I will examine the main clashes in this debate, which were, number 1, the quality of China as a global superpower, number 2, the alternatives of global superpowers to China, and finally, I will do some weighing. Before I begin, let's make one thing clear. In the claim that China is exploitative, the opposition has conveniently failed to engage with the United States' problematic and equally exploitative nature, the proxy war started in the Middle East, the millions of families who are left in chaos, the hundreds of countries that are forcing deals that do not benefit them. How is leaving the United States as the only superpower in the world a good idea? This is the greatest point that opposition has failed to engage with. In the point that China is a problematic state, we support a world where China is a superpower. This does not mean that we stand behind all of China's policies, nor do we support a world where China is the only superpower. What opposition, however, is forced to do and has failed to do is stand behind a world where the United States is the only superpower in the world, a world where there is no political power to balance off the United States. The opposition in this debate has conveniently ignored the equally powerful political influence the United States has and the equally exploitative nature it has as well. The opposition has not sufficiently explained to you, panel, why the United States should continue as the only global superpower without an appropriate accountability mechanism. Now on to clashes. What is the quality of China as a global superpower? They've told you that China as a global superpower does not have the incentive to help others that don't benefit it. They've also told you that China would not be an appropriate global superpower because of its debt and because it does not have the capacity to continue being a global superpower in the next 10 years, for example. We've told you, however, that internal domestic problems are not mutually exclusive, that the United States, a current global superpower and a global superpower that has existed for decades now, has dealt with domestic problems and is currently dealing with domestic problems like unemployment, political turmoil, but that, however, has not stopped it from working as a global superpower, investing in other countries, and the opposition has ignored the fact that removing China as a global superpower would create more disastrous effects because China invests in many developing countries in Asia and Africa, and removing these investments would leave those countries dry without any power investing in them, giving them the infrastructure and the development that they need. We've told you that China efficiently fits the requirements of a global superpower because of its investments in Asia, in Africa. We've explained to you why alternatives to China are not going to work because, number 1, of the cultural and social divide of those countries. Number 2, because of China's unique capacity to provide economic investments and leverages that other countries do not have the capacity to to provide. And finally, because of China's ability and past ability to create investments that have been successful in the past, the opposition panel has tried to give you examples of deals that have not worked, but they've conveniently ignored the countless deals that have helped countries in Asia and Africa alike develop infrastructure and economies. So now I'm going to do some final weighing. In this debate, we win because we believe we've won the clashes on power vacuums and accountability mechanisms. However, even if you think that the opposition wins that clash, why do we still win the debate? We get the most economic benefits. Opposition in this debate are forced to abandon having China as a global superpower, meaning that half the world, if not more, loses out on necessary economic deals. On our side, however, both China and the United States exist as global superpowers, meaning we reap greater economic deals and benefits for developing countries. Number two, we get the most accountability. Without China as a global superpower, there's no mechanism to hold back the United States or keep other global powers in check. And thus, we've told you that a world with China as a global superpower is a world with accountability, long-term guarantee of economic and technological investment. And for all these reasons, I proudly stand for proposition. Thank you.